Good morning, friends. I hope you are well. I want to take a minute this morning to talk to you about something. Somebody recently asked me what I thought about how to apply the teachings of Jesus when a person is coming from a place of past trauma, unresolved in their life, the kind that makes them tend to be codependent on other people, and gets them into destructive relational patterns with people that they are trying to help, trying to save. Now, this happens to be right in my wheelhouse. It's one of my favorite questions to contemplate, or at least if I consider how much time I've given to this subject overall in my life. You all know I'm coming from a place of a faith background as a Christian, as a pastor up until recently. And though I am not moving back or away from anything necessarily, I'm at a point in my life where I'm moving beyond the last 20 years of my time in Christianity and ministry, many different forms of Christian ministry. So this is not necessarily something that I'm speaking to or about as much anymore, because I'm kind of stepping outside of that world. I'm still connected, I'm still involved in some ways, but not in the way that I have been. And yet, so much of my experience, so much of my history, background, and thought still lives there in many ways. So I want to talk for a minute about this. Jesus said, "Be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect." How many times, and if this doesn't relate to you, if this doesn't apply to you, good on you. But there are some people whom I think this does and will. How many times did I hear that and think, oh God, okay, let's give it my best shot. What does this mean? I can imagine myself as a young man hearing those words of Jesus, and many like them in the New Testament, and seeing them through my very narrowly focused lens at the time. Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Well, immediately I go in my mind to whatever conception of perfection that I have, which typically is some type of blameless, faultless moral standard. Perfection, to be without flaw, without defect, without failure. Be perfect as my Father is perfect. And so I interpreted it through the kind of Western Reformed legal framework, understanding of salvation, that God is like that. That somehow, some way, as ridiculous as it sounds, the creator of all the universe, the uncreated, eternal one, who is without lack or need within himself, who does not need to be served by human hands, as Paul said, for some reason he's got this bent, this need for perfection, absolute moral perfection, no flaw, no defect, no cracks, no brokenness whatsoever, nothing. He demands that. He requires that. He has to have that, or else there's nothing else to discuss. And yet, we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Nothing in the known created universe is perfect. In fact, perfection is a made-up concept. It doesn't exist in reality. There is nothing perfect in the sense that we often think of perfection as being without flaw or without defect. We imagine God to be perfect, but nothing within the grasp of our senses, nothing within the material universe that God has given us to live within is in any way perfect. And so we think we've fallen short of the glory, and we interpret it that way, as if this perfection that God is, that God demands from us as well, we've not measured up to that. And yet here we have Jesus saying, "Be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect." And yet we realize we'll never do that. We can't do that. It's an impossibility to do that because that doesn't even exist. And so then we come to the substitutionary atonement. Oh, okay, so the perfect one came, and he lived, and he died in our place, and now I can take his righteousness, his perfection, becomes mine through faith. And that's how I interpreted that for a long time. So there was no actual application of Jesus' words, be perfect as your Father is perfect. There was just me trying to fit it into an ideological or a theological framework. Well, I know that's not possible, but God demands it, God requires it. Fortunately, God found a way to make this reality through faith. So when Jesus says that, it's like the law. It's like Paul using the law. He's using it to bring me to a point of despair over myself. He's using it, maybe I'll try for a while to measure up, to work for it. But eventually the point is finally to see that I can't. And I give up in despair, oh wretched man that I am, in Paul's words. And I look for salvation outside of myself. And so that was the best I could do with those words. Be perfect as my Father is perfect. Well, that's just Jesus setting us up for failure so that we'll look to him for the fulfillment of these words. Because nobody can be perfect except Jesus, except God, as the Father is perfect. I don't see it that way anymore, of course. Not just for the first, more simple, problematic sense that, that sets you up for failure, that sets you on a life of trying to achieve something that can never be achieved, but also because it paints a really nasty picture of God. Now, hopefully you had a good father, you had a good mother. I'm speaking of your mom and dad, not God as Father. But imagine a father who demands perfection of his children, unflinchingly. Even if that father somehow provides it for his children in the way that we often believe Jesus has or does within the Christian faith, that we can take his sacrifice, we receive his righteousness, he takes our sin, we take his righteousness, bada bing, bada boom. Now we're perfect through Christ in the eyes of God. That still leaves us with a God, with a Father, who demands perfection at all costs. And that's problematic on a whole different level. And this is why you have so many Christians, even who having accepted, who having mentally assented to this exchange, that by faith they are the righteousness of Christ. It's all good. It's worked out. He took our sin. We took his righteousness. God sees me through Christ. Yada, yada, yada. But they're still so troubled. Their lives are still so desperate. It's a quiet desperation. It's an inner desperation. And they say they are saved by grace through faith, and they have this rest and this peace and whatnot, but it comes out. It comes out in a lot of subtle ways, that they're still desperate inside, even though they think they've found the answer through faith in Christ, because they've still got a God who demands this their concept of perfection. And I think the whole thing is off. And I think it relates again back to what I started with here about people whose upbringing, whose past experiences, whose unresolved pain and trauma lead them into unhealthy codependent patterns with people they're trying to help and save. And I want to get to that. But it comes off of a misunderstanding of this. I think if anything, what Jesus was getting at there when he said, be perfect as my Father is perfect, a better translation of that word would be whole. Be whole as my Father is whole. And so it's a call to wholeness, which is a whole different thing than what we're talking about here with like a moral standard, righteousness, perfection so conceived, right? How are we to imitate and follow Christ, if that's your thing? How are you to follow Christ? I think, and I offer this to you, it's not by glibly applying hardly understood teachings to your life. Teachings that many of them are so far outside of your own historical context and social context that you don't even know exactly what they mean. Case in point, turn the other cheek. If someone compels you to go a mile, go with them too. If someone takes you to the court and sues you for your coat, give them your cloak, your undergarment also. These teachings of Jesus, which are often twisted into some type of misguided, pacifistic type of nonviolence had a certain social context, and they meant something to Jesus's listeners that they don't immediately mean to us. And they actually were like full of like resistance to oppression and power and unjust suffering. Not just like a laying down and becoming a doormat for the people who are mistreating you and hurting you and doing you wrong. But we don't immediately see that, but we know we're supposed to follow Jesus, so we know we're supposed to turn the other cheek. I got to be like Jesus, right? What would Jesus do? And we get stuck asking that question, what would Jesus do? And I think it's a horrible, horrible question. It's not about what Jesus would do. It's about what are you going to do? This is your life. Jesus lived his life. Learn from it, emulate it, all that stuff. But you got a life to live now. It's not about what he did. It's about what you're going to do. And so many people take that question, what would Jesus do? And they're applying it from this kind of distorted, misguided point of view, I think. Especially those of us who have those kind of codependent issues. We know we've been burnt 100 times. We've been hurt and we've hurt others. We've got this mythos that we live by, that we are the savior of other people, that we are able to help them, to give them something they don't have, and so we try to rescue people. We try to do for people what only they ultimately can do for themselves. And it goes bad in the end, and it involves us in all kinds of turmoil and pain and unnecessary suffering, and we wonder what the hell is going on. Why? I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to help people. I'm supposed to serve them. I'm supposed to die to myself. I'm supposed to be perfect as the Father is perfect. I'm supposed to give. I'm supposed to sacrifice myself, even to the point of death. I'm supposed to take up my cross and follow him. I'm supposed to, I should, I ought to. And this is how we interpret it. But I'm convinced, I'm taking it and running with it, the idea that Christ's teachings, many of them, really can only be followed from a place of wholeness. And they're meant for people who are on that path of healing and wholeness, who are coming to wholeness, not who are broken, not who are approaching this, for instance, as it pertains to this conversation, from a place of codependence. Because when we try to apply the teachings of Jesus, to love our neighbor, to sacrifice for the good of other people, many times those of us who have this particular struggle end up taking the self-emptying, kenotic love of Christ, such a beautiful, beautiful concept, a thing that I still believe has the power and the ability to save the world. But we take that and we twist it, and we end up being codependent with people in our lives whom we're trying to help, we're trying to save, we're well-intentioned towards them, but we're so broken ourselves, so desperate inside, trying to find fulfillment through our sacrifice for other people. And I think it stems from this. We lack wholeness, and yet we're trying to apply the teachings of Jesus in our lives to help other people who also lack wholeness. And it involves us in all kinds of hell and all kinds of difficulty. And we are hurt, we hurt, they hurt, nothing works. We don't end up actually helping anybody. And this leads us into all sorts of frustration in the end. And I think this is the reason why. So, how are we to imitate Christ? How are we to follow Christ? I think it's found in that statement. Be perfect, as my Father is perfect. Be whole, as my Father is whole. If you're interested in following Christ, this is the way, I believe. This is the primary thing that you should be, the primary work you should be involved in is the work of becoming whole. And then as you become whole, you'll begin to see and interpret and understand some of the practical teachings of Jesus in a whole new light. And you'll actually be able to do some of them. You actually will maybe be able to enter into the life of another person who needs help and actually give them some genuine help that does, kind of equip them, meet them where they're at, give them the tools that they need to help themselves, because ultimately that's it. I can't help anybody in the end. You can't either. You can only help yourself, and they can only help themselves. Now, we enter into this mutuality together. That's the goal of Genuine love is to enter into this mutuality where we share our lives with one another in healthy, non-codependent ways, and so help one another in that sense by bearing one another's burdens, by weeping with those who weep, rejoicing with those who rejoice, and helping others find the tools that we've found along the way, in the hope that they'll pick them up and use them for themselves. But that's what it's got to come down to. They can only help themselves. You can only help yourself. You can't help anybody else. You can't save anybody else. You can't rescue anybody else in that way. So if that's still where you're at, if that's the place you're coming from, and then you're trying to take and apply the teachings of Jesus that encourage us to practice self-emptying, kenotic love, you're going to mess that up. And you're going to twist that, and you're going to use that to get into all kinds of unhealthy situations. And you know this deep down, or eventually you'll come to know this and realize this. But it's hard to let go. It's so, I know, man. God, 20 years, I know how damn hard it is to let go, to lay down the cross. And some of my Christian friends, in particular, the best thing they could do for themselves and for the people they love and want to hope to serve is to lay down the cross, man. Put it down. It's not yours to bear. So, take up your own cross, Jesus said. Bear the suffering of your own reality. Become whole. That's the only way you'll end up being able to offer some relief to other people, but it won't be the kind of relief you're trying to give them now, where you're trying to save and fix everybody. And then deep down, you're trying to save and fix yourself through other people. You can't do it that way. So anyway, I don't want to go much longer here because I'm videoing this on my phone, and I'm sure the battery or the storage is going to run out soon. But I wanted to address that. I hope that is helpful to you, because I know some of you fairly well, and I know you're coming from some of you are coming from a similar place that I've come from, and you wrestle with similar things that I've wrestled with, and this has been huge for me. And I'd love to take more time and flesh this out more and talk in more detail, but I think this is enough maybe to give you a little taste of where I stand on this, how I view it. And hopefully maybe you can find some insight in there for yourself as well. So hit me up in the comments. Tell me what you think about this, if it resonates with you in any way. If not, that's fine. If not, God bless you. I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't resonate at all with you, that you've never had to go through this, because it's not fun. But when you come out on the other end, you see some things more clearly, and you're able to make better sense of why so many of the relationships you've been involved in, where you've tried to help people in the name of Jesus, have gone so horribly, awfully wrong. So be perfect. Be whole, as your Father in heaven is also whole. All right? Hey, have a good day. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.